Hello and welcome to today's webinar titled Managing Multiple Intermediary Project Sites. The target audience for this session is intermediary project directors who are responsible for managing and working with multiple sites. But regardless of your role within your VISTA project, we're glad to have you as we explore best practices for project directors in overseeing their sites. This session really focuses on helping intermediary VISTA projects learn various ways to oversee their service sites. Depending on various factors, such as the number of sites that you have, the geographic location of the sites, and even how each site operates at its own organization, intermediary project directors may seek ideas on how to supervise site supervisors, and they may look for examples on how other intermediary VISTA projects are managing their sites. Let me first start by introducing today's speakers. I'm Eric Powell, and I'll be your host today. I'm a training specialist with the VISTA program at AmeriCorps headquarters in Washington, D.C., and I'm a proud AmeriCorps VISTA member alum and AmeriCorps VISTA leader alum with Campus Compact. I'm joined today by our main speaker, Ryan Fewens-Bliss. Ryan is a nonprofit consultant who is one of our national VISTA trainers. In his day job, he leads the Michigan College Access Network and serves as a local elected official on his township council. He's a previous AmeriCorps State and VISTA program manager, and his organization currently hosts more than 100 AmeriCorps members serving across the state of Michigan, and an AmeriCorps VISTA serving in the headquarters. Hello, Ryan.
Hi, so excited to be here. Thank you for the introduction, Eric. I'm delighted to talk about the topic today. I love thinking about this work, so welcome to the participants. Can't wait to get started.
Very happy to have you, and thanks for joining us again, Ryan. I do also want to introduce our guest speaker, Willie Heineke, who is a National Service Program Manager with Housing Action Illinois. As a 3-term AmeriCorps VISTA alum, Willie brings his lived experience in national service and social justice to his role at Housing Action, where he leads a team of staff and AmeriCorps leaders to manage and expand the now nationwide AmeriCorps VISTA program called the Housing Action AmeriCorps Network. Welcome, Willie.
Thanks, Eric. I'm looking forward to sharing some of my experiences around managing and working with sites and hearing from each of you in our engagement activities.
We're delighted to have you with us as well, Willie, and thank you both for coming to share your knowledge, your wisdom, and your experience.
Thanks again, Eric. Today, we're going to cover 3 important points about VISTA intermediary projects. We'll start by defining what an intermediary is in the context of a VISTA project specifically. Next, we'll identify 3 site management best practices, and we'll conclude by exploring some strategies that will put you in a position of success when something unexpected comes your project's way, like we know often does. At the end of today's session, we'll answer questions you may have. Throughout this webinar, we'll offer tips to best practices in managing your sites, but it's important to recognize it's not a complete list. This is a skill to practice and revisit as your intermediary project progresses. Before we get to the tips, though, let's first make sure we all have the same understanding of what an intermediary even is. It's not a word we use in our culture often. An intermediary is the organization that links the AmeriCorps agency and the sites that do the work of the VISTA project. To be this bridge, an intermediary must serve as the organization that has that legal agreement with AmeriCorps called the Memorandum of Agreement, or MOA, to operate the VISTA project and further to be responsible for really all the aspects of managing the overall VISTA project. The intermediary is that formal grantee of AmeriCorps. And intermediaries oversee multiple sites, which are different legal entities and nonprofit organizations that partner with the intermediary and have a memorandum of understanding, or MOU, with the sites to make sure they understand the rules. When I served as an AmeriCorps VISTA program manager, my organization served as an intermediary. We received VISTA member slots and funds from AmeriCorps. I then assigned our VISTA members to college campuses across the state of Michigan. Intermediaries are able to increase the impact of an AmeriCorps VISTA program by facilitating and amplifying the important work that's happening in communities across the country. Good intermediaries are able to efficiently operate programs to increase the outcomes that we're looking for. Managing your overall VISTA project and providing your sites with those MOU is in part about establishing the expectations for yourself and for your sites. For example, you'll want to create and share the process by which you'll collect information from your sites that allows you to submit the required reports to AmeriCorps. Similarly, establishing a structure and a plan to work with sites around possible shared activities such as marketing and promoting service opportunities, recruitment, orienting members, etc., is also a part of serving as that bridge between AmeriCorps and the sites.
With that bridge and understanding of what an intermediary is, we'd love to hear from you now about what you think about this role, and specifically, what surprises you most about managing multiple project sites? You'll go ahead and use the chat to answer this question. Again, please select everyone from the drop-down menu so that we can all see your response. We'll play some light music and we'll look at the responses in just a few. Seeing a lot of responses coming in. And so in just looking at a couple of them, I see some surprises around how much can be done jointly when the intermediary and the sites all work together as opposed to in silos and on their own. Teamwork makes the dream work, as they always say, so I love that. A couple of other responses, how eager our sites are to collaborate with each other, which is great. We know a lot of times the sites want to learn from the intermediary in general, but also collaborating with each other, I think is absolutely essential. And surprised at the impact that the VISTA members have with all the sites together. Again, that collaborative joint effort of looking at all the greatness that's going on. So these responses are great. I love seeing the range and the similarities of some of them, the drastic differences, a lot more responses coming in. And some comments really nicely connect with what we're going to be exploring together over the rest of the hour. But before we get to that, Willie, I'm gonna ask you to round out our discussion about intermediaries and their role. And the question I have for you, Willie, is what comes to your mind when you think of an intermediary?
Thanks for the question, Eric. I'll offer a practical view of how I think about an intermediary first, and then I'll share how different roles from those within the intermediary to the sites are connected. So, intermediary sponsors are critical connections between local communities that need help and resources available at AmeriCorps VISTA. The term emphasizes how intermediaries build mutually reciprocal relationships with sites and manage the VISTA project. Intermediaries provide a way for organizations that are smaller and less resourced with staff or finances, for example, to be part of the VISTA project and benefit from AmeriCorps resources. In other words, for small organizations, the intermediary is the critical bridge that enables partnership with AmeriCorps. To be a sturdy bridge, intermediary project directors should take steps to effectively manage and support sites with their members. Create and implement a plan for overseeing all sites to reconcile the varied processes and supervision methods that sites, which are different legal entities from the intermediary, may have. Just like how VISTA projects benefit all pertinent stakeholders, the low-income communities, and the individuals the project is serving, the organization and supervisor hosting the position, and the VISTA members and leaders themselves Intermediaries can function as the connector of all pertinent stakeholders for a VISTA project, people interested in service, VISTA members and leaders, site staff, and the federal agency of AmeriCorps during all phases of the project lifecycle, from project ideation to end-term reporting. Here are a few examples of what I mean. Housing Action Illinois accepts applications to host positions from current and potential site organizations annually. During this phase, we provide comprehensive feedback to sites to help them get their project proposal to an approvable status by the federal agency. Our experience has shown most organizations have approvable projects, but not the time and energy to properly frame with them with the requirements and language of service. During the recruitment phase, Housing Action shares information about our VISTA member alumni outcomes, namely the percentage of successful life after service placements by their 366th day of service, with applicants who apply to serve in a position. Doing so encourages applicants to accept offers from my sites, and we are in effect connecting the newest VISTA members with the hundreds of previous VISTA members so they know if they commit to service, no matter where they want to go afterward, we'll make sure they get there. By the onboarding and supervising phase, Housing Action has supported the sites so wholly that the site supervisors are appreciative of our contributions, so they put in the work to make sure their position and VISTA member is thriving in service while remaining in compliance with federal regulations. Site supervisors' buy-in is essential to high-quality service because as an intermediary, we cannot be everywhere all at once, so they function as our boots on the ground. All of this work then makes VISTA members semi-annual quantitative and narrative-based reporting an opportunity to share their impact as opposed to a federally required report. They're excited to share their progress and want to impress us with their reports. When you get a VISTA member and a site supervisor in that kind of mindset, it can get really impressive really quick. All of that being said, I would like to take a moment to highlight that one of the clearest ways intermediaries function as connectors is through AmeriCorps VISTA leader positions. There is no role in the professional world just like a VISTA leader. They mentor members, design new support systems for supervisors, mediate conflicts, recruit the newest candidates for terms of service, etc. Overall, leaders function as the tip of the spear for all phases of a VISTA project lifecycle. A high-performing intermediary's functionality can be evaluated on the quality and dedication of their VISTA leaders.
Thanks, Willie. I see this great resource sharing in the webinar chat. Keep it up, folks. The enthusiasm and contribution, Willie, that you mentioned seeing from VISTA members and leaders and site supervisors when they're set up for success is really a great benefit of planning out your site management approach. So today we'll highlight 3 practices that can help an intermediary sponsor provide effective site supervision. First is setting expectations during orientation. The second is establishing ongoing communication and engagement. And the third is supporting sites with member recruitment and management. Let's get into our first topic of key supervision practices around setting expectations. As we do, it'll be really helpful having the relationship map that Willie described a few moments ago in mind to understand who you are working with and who benefits from the following strategies. How do you orient your site supervisors? What you include in your site supervisor orientation can make or break your opportunity to build a relationship with them because it outlines expectations and resources and information that all contribute to that ultimate success of the project. Some practical yet critical things to include in your orientation are the mission and history of the VISTA program at your site, the technical rules of the VISTA program from AmeriCorps, an overview of your intermediary VISTA project, any intermediary policies or procedures that sites are expected to follow, talking about project staff and resources, Data collection and sharing systems is always important, and reporting expectations and guidelines I found to be really important to cover over and over again. Also, for your orientation, consider doing something similar to what Willie just said to us by defining the roles on your project and how they intersect. Outline that decision-making authority and processes that answer, for example, questions like who is selecting VISTA members and who's filling out the actual forms and what should I be getting from the intermediary. If you resolve those sorts of questions up front in the orientation, it indicates your willingness and preparedness to think about what your sites and their members need and what they might encounter, which can go a long way toward building goodwill and trust. The clearer and more direct that communication I found, and those instructions and decisions can be made to those site supervisors, the fewer problems you'll have later. Does that track, Willie, with your experience?
It really does. For my supervisors, we use a multitude of training and orientation methods. Written resources with in-depth explanations of their roles and expectations, along with information presented in the form of checklists, cheat sheets, and overviews. So the supervisors have both the micro and macro understanding of their roles. Every other month webinars where we provide a heads up to the supervisor of the upcoming deadlines and requirements like reporting, performance reviews, recruitment, stuff like that. Key moments and other opportunities connect with the intermediary and coalition at large. So during these webinars, we also leave open space for the supervisors to share pressing concerns and challenges to see if they can support each other or if Housing Action needs to configure new systems of support. Lastly, and surely not least, Housing Action staff are available pretty much at all times for one-on-one calls to meet the supervisors wherever they're at to make sure they feel supported by us so they can fully support their AmeriCorps member, so they can fully support their organization and community.
Ryan and Willie, thank you so much for providing some key management practices for orientation, as well as some specific examples. I want to turn it to you now. So imagine that you are in a meeting orienting site supervisors, leaders, members, and community members to AmeriCorps, the VISTA program, and the Intermediary project. Use the chat to answer the question you see on the screen. What are the top 3 things you would share when orienting site supervisors, leaders, members, and community members? I will briefly say, of course, you might have 20 things that are at the top of your mind, or maybe you only have 1, but we're just looking for the top 3 that you would share with orienting all these individuals. And you can feel free to reply with just a few words or a sentence, but we'll give you a moment to think about your answer to this question. Okay. So thank you for the responses that are coming in. Overarching themes I'm seeing so far, a lot of people mentioning roles and responsibilities, critical tasks, expectations, several mentions of, among the top 3 things, the VISTA member handbook, the memorandum of understanding, overarching rules and guidelines of the VISTA project sites, because they sometimes have their own rules in addition to what the intermediary has. A lot of comments on policies, organizational etiquette and culture. So it's a great variety of responses still coming in. And maybe this will give you a clue as to other things that you want to include in your orientation with all of your site supervisors, leaders, members, and community members. I do know that it may have been challenging, as I mentioned earlier, to only think of the top 3 because you might have only had one thing, or I'm seeing several comments where people had 5 or 6, which is okay. But we know that that is very much a possibility because there's so many things to orient your individuals with. But I do want to thank you for your contribution. And Ryan, I want to turn it to you and say that my experience is that to really effectively orient and train individuals, you need to manage your communication and identify ways to engage all of your audiences. And I know you've had a lot of experience working with individuals and sites. What can you share from your experience?
Yeah, absolutely, Eric. I agree. And actually, that'll take us to the second key management practice I want to talk about. And it moves us into building and maintaining site communication and engagement. As early as your project allows, consider offering verbal or written acknowledgement that the sites may have their own rules, their own regulations. Some have policies and procedures, while recognizing that the Intermediary VISTA project also has guidelines to follow to be in compliance with AmeriCorps in the VISTA program. We build engagement by building relationships. So let's reinforce something that I think Willie described as a practice for Housing Action Illinois. Get to know the site supervisors individually, not just in a collective meeting. Use a one-on-one meeting to make that personal connection, whether in person, virtual, planned, or even spontaneous. To get started, intermediaries should have some scripted language that they share with all of the site supervisors that touches on things like what it means to be a VISTA supervisor and part of your Intermediary VISTA project, what professional experience you and the supervisor bring to the table, communication styles and preferences between each other, and the role of the VISTA leader or leaders if they exist in that project. Maintaining those ongoing relationships is important too. And you can do that by keeping in mind that as your project develops, there may be other project stakeholders at their sites that you should meet with. Maybe there's someone at the site who helps with member recruitment. The project director should connect with the site supervisor, but it can be beneficial to the overall project to make additional connections to better bring people into the project. It's also helpful in case a supervisor leaves and there's turnover, or you're already, and then you're already in touch with another point of contact. You can also maintain those relationships by intentionally creating opportunities for sites to connect with each other. The intermediary doesn't need to plan or even be in all of those meetings, but one way that intermediaries can thrive is by fostering the collaboration among them. Even though they're different legal entities, they may have things to share about their experiences and their challenges, and then recommendations for each other that will resonate. Even though members may serve at those different sites, the goals of the overall VISTA project remain the same. So there should be lots to talk about between sites. Project directors may initially set up a meeting for sites to collaborate or simply encourage them to do it on their own. Finally, continue and plan for regular communication with your sites. Review your strategy to determine if your communication structure needs adjustment, perhaps because you have new sites to your account, or you create a new template you would like used going forward to help collect information for reports. After all, we all could use a smooth process for submitting and requiring reports to AmeriCorps. Since sites do not submit reports directly to AmeriCorps, the sites provide the intermediary information, and then the intermediary submits the reports to AmeriCorps. That can be accomplished by having a thoughtful way to collect and organize the information that's needed from your sites. Something else that may prompt you to revisit your communication structure is the role of the VISTA leader, because they can be helpful in ensuring ongoing communication and engagement. In my program, I was primarily responsible as the program director for communicating with site supervisors. And then my VISTA leader communicated with VISTA members. Of course, there were often times where one of us would communicate to the other group, but it was a nice way of doing that peer-to-peer communication and having that accountability. There's no rule that your ongoing communications can't be a source of fun. Acknowledging successes, small acts of kindness, and gratitude goes a long way. Those things make a big difference. Willie, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, we at Housing Action Illinois have noticed there seems to be a misconception by most funders that intermediaries fully understand. No organization, especially those in need of VISTA resources, staff members have time in their jobs that are unassigned that they can dedicate to the requirements of a VISTA project. As an intermediary, we can use continued communication and engagement to support one of our key performance indicators of making the site interaction a priority and making VISTA resources as simple and intuitive as possible. We want to enable sites to be able to fully integrate these VISTA resources into their existing and emerging initiatives. Another reason behind demystifying resources is that a lot of federal agencies' terminology is confusing and unintuitive. So translating the federal requirements into language around the site needs and desires is paramount to building a relationship of open communication. Ultimately, we want to generate positive feedback loops of impact and passion to achieve our respective mission statements. On the screen is a chart I share with my sites to show them the responsibilities and expectations for managing and retaining their AmeriCorps VISTA members. I know there's a lot of information on this slide. By sharing this chart, as opposed to solely sharing the sponsor handbook, we are clearly showing what we and they will do throughout the member's term of service. In a lot of ways, our role is to build a programmatic structure for the sites to execute, and Housing Action Illinois will support them in troubleshooting issues and challenges as they arise. Almost counterintuitively, the best way to increase your probability of retaining your VISTA member is by focusing on their life after service plans from the get-go. In doing so, you're making it clear to them that although the pay is rough and the work is challenging, the purpose of them getting these things done does have a direct impact on their life too.
Each individual likely has their own communication style and preference, but our discussion offered some really good communication strategies for you to follow and customize them to effectively manage your sites. And since we know that communication should be reciprocal and go both ways, we'll flip it around now. The question we're asking you in the chat now is, what do you want your sites to communicate to you? Another way of thinking about this is, what do you want your sites to share with you or tell you about what's going on at the site? Again, we'll give you about a minute to think about what you feel is important to hear from sites. And again, please post your comments in the chat, making sure to send your message to everyone. Okay. A lot of responses coming in very quickly. Again, overarching themes I'm seeing, a lot of intermediaries want their sites to share specific data with them, data that their members are collecting, data that they're seeing in the community. They want sites to share with them questions, any questions they have that clarify key policies, responsibilities, action items. Of course, sharing any issues that they encounter with the members or at their project. And lots of comments just again about sharing any concerns, questions, thoughts they have as they work on, as we just discussed, reciprocal, I can't say that word, communication, making sure that everyone's in alignment and on the same page around the project operations and how everything goes. And then the last few comments I see relate to, again, action items by members, sharing the progress from the members, their successes, their achievements, but also some of their challenges and how perhaps the intermediary can intervene or assist with some of the challenges at the sites. So great job. And I'll add from my personal perspective that just in looking at this, it's hard to say. There's no real right or wrong answer. So let me turn to Willie first and then Ryan. What are you seeing? How does this resonate with you?
Well, I'm definitely seeing a theme about conflicts arising, and I so fully agree that it really, when you build these relationships right, they do want to share even the challenges that are going on. Um, I think in a lot of ways, if there isn't conflict going on, then we're not doing our jobs right. This work is hard. We're building the capacity. These people are new. Um, we've all are trying our best, and sometimes it doesn't work. And if we're not running into conflicts, then we might be falling into like toxic positivity or just not authentic service. And so, I do a lot of trainings with my site supervisors and members about conflict resolution. And it's really great to see that it's also a priority for so many other people on the call.
Yeah, I really appreciated seeing some suggestions around giving sites control over what they're reporting. I think that's really helpful for folks to feel the two-sided equation we're trying to build between intermediary and sites. It can often feel one-directional, but it's better when we're sort of pushing and pulling to make the project better together. And I saw someone mention some internal changes at the organization that might affect the project. That was always something that I wanted to know as well. Is there a new executive director? Is there some sort of scandal brewing at the organization? Is there a new grant win at the organization? Things that you might read about in the news. I always wanted to hear from members and supervisors first.
These are great suggestions, what we're seeing in the chat and what Ryan and Willie shared. And I really do hope that we're reading these responses and taking our own notes on how we can use and adapt some of these at your own project with your sites. After all, this is a great opportunity to start the conversation with other intermediary project directors, as I'm seeing lots of comments about sharing resources in the chat. We'll be able to continue that work together by communicating and sharing these ideas on the VISTA Connect side of the VISTA campus, which I'll talk about just a little bit later.
Thanks for those responses again. They really represented what I have experienced myself, so I appreciate that. It's a great practice to outline what you think, what you would like your sites to share with you. Another place in the project cycle for which it is important for you to establish a communication strategy is in member recruitment. How your project recruits members is really up to you. Some intermediaries are more involved in that recruitment process and others less so. It really all depends on how much responsibility you want to give to your sites. That's that push and pull I was talking about a moment ago. But at a minimum, the intermediary should assist sites in member recruitment by outlining your applicant selection process and putting together some general marketing and promotion for your project, offering ongoing and continued support, and suggesting specific interview questions and tips is always helpful. And then getting involved in the interview process, I always found to be incredibly helpful too. In my experience, sharing the recruitment task is the best way to go. The more people who are looking for the talented and passionate potential VISTA members, the better it is for the individual sites, and thus the better it is for the intermediary. After the recruitment phase and during the ongoing project management, I learned to incorporate information about stakeholders that should be engaged by VISTA members at the local site. After hearing questions from sites like, who should I connect with at my site? And when do I start reaching out? And how do I best contact them? I started to provide this information more upfront and make sure the information is in a place that all sites can access. Now, it's not the intermediary's job to hand over a contact list of stakeholders and partners, but I found it helpful to talk about the types of contacts to make. This is especially helpful for VISTA members who are serving in a community in which they're not familiar, and for VISTA members serving at a site that is new to the project. So if your issue you're working on is hunger, say, I would imagine you'd encourage members to talk to local food pantries and United Ways and soup kitchens. If your issue is education, it seems like typical contacts would be colleges and school districts and after-school programs. This can really help your VISTA member hit the ground running when they land at their site.
I like to build on that point of following practices that allow people to hit the ground running. I mentioned earlier how at Housing Action Illinois, we build resources and provide space to build buy-in from organizations and their staff members. However, especially in the last few years, we have a lot of staff transition at our site organizations, which is to say, although we do so much work to train and build buy-in among our site staff, oftentimes we have to start from scratch in the middle of a project lifecycle. We require these new recruiters and supervisors to have one-on-ones as soon as possible with us so we can catch them up to speed and provide a checklist of tasks and responsibilities. This way, they know we are in support of them so they can reach out with any and all questions. Especially in these moments, when there is a new staff member at a site with the recruitment and supervision responsibilities thrusted onto them while they orient and onboard all of their other responsibilities, VISTA leaders' expertise and value shines. Friendly reminders on deadlines, translating federal technical jargon, and critical processes reviews are just a few ways in which VISTA leaders support these new site staff. As we all know, starting a new job can be intimidating, as you can feel in the spotlight of performance evaluation at all times. Collaborating with a VISTA leader can feel like an oasis in the harsh desert of the first 90 days on a new job.
Very much agreed. And thank you, Ryan and Willie, for so many tips around managing staff across sites and the real life examples. They're so meaningful as they address really the crux of today's topic, how to effectively supervise and support sites and members at your project sites. So just as you're communicating with and engaging your sites, we want to engage you by using an online whiteboard called Mural. And I'll give you a few brief instructions, but the question that I want you to answer is, what is one important practice that you follow in managing personnel at different organizations? We'll ask you to be as specific as possible, and you can elaborate on the method or the approach that you use, for example, when you tend to employ it, and also if that approach ever varies across circumstances. So in a minute, you'll see a link in the chat, and to participate, you'll click on that link to access the collaborative whiteboard. After you select the link, you'll on the welcome window, simply select View as a Visitor. Then on the next screen, you can enter your name, or you can select View as a Visitor a second time. And then once you're in the mural, even though Mural provides many options for adding your input, we're asking you to post your response using a sticky note, simply because it's easy to use and to read. I do want to mention that to post your sticky note, you must double click in the white space, not in the blue banner. And then of course, we ask you to be a good collaborator on the mural by trying not to move or accidentally delete someone else's post, but you can adjust your screen as you need to make sure you can see everything. And then we will be screen sharing the mural in just a minute. So after you've posted your sticky note and then typed in your response, you can navigate back to your Zoom screen to be able to better see the responses coming in. But again, as a reminder, double click in the white space. You can type in your response and then it'll get stuck on the mural whiteboard. So we'll give you a moment to see responses coming in. As I'm seeing several more responses coming in, I'm going to first turn to Ryan and then Willie just to let me know what you're seeing, either overarching themes or some specific comments that resonate with you.
I love seeing all of these moving arrows. It really feels like we're a community trying to solve problems together. It's really fun. I love that I see people talking about convening site supervisors. That's certainly something I did in my site pretty regularly to keep the communication open. And then I see other people say, talking to supervisors individually and having individual relationships. Again, certainly something that I thought was really important. Often, and we'll talk about this in a few moments, about challenges that come up when you have that personal relationship and the site supervisors, it makes it a lot easier to deal with the challenges that come up throughout the year or years that you're working with them if you feel like you have a good relationship with them. So I love those relationship building comments. Willie, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of great ideas on here. I shared one myself, so I'm going to highlight that one, which has been over the years occasionally when we're working with a new site or a new staff member at an existing site, they'll say to us, "Oh, well, I've hosted AmeriCorps members before, so like you don't have to worry about me." And like that has almost gotten to mean nothing to me. Like at that point, I have to say to them, like, okay, tell me what you think then. Because there's state and national, there's NCCC, there's VISTA, and then there are different like expectations and requirements of each intermediary and each site. And so like when on our internal screening scorecard, when we get a new site, if they say they've hosted AmeriCorps members before, that doesn't mean they are not going to get the same level of like support and really our attention. So yeah, that's what I want to highlight. Again, everything on here is brilliant stuff. You should screenshot this and do everything everybody else is writing too.
I echo Ryan and Willie's comments and love the depth and the breadth of responses. Appreciate the participation because these are a variety of approaches and practices in managing staff. And of course, we all try to plan ahead so that we can try to avoid any obstacles and challenges. But unfortunately, as Willie mentioned, sometimes we know that things don't always go as smoothly as we want. But again, thank you again for your participation.
Unfortunately, that's true, Eric. As you said, issues can and do occur. So we're going to round out our conversation today by talking about how to make an unexpected issue an opportunity for success. So we're going to use that asset-based, not deficit-based language. I know it's not coming as a surprise that in intermediary projects, sometimes an issue pops up. Just given the scale of the project and the number of folks involved, it's a smart investment to spend some time thinking about how you will handle such situations to ensure the best outcome possible. Some of my recommendations include being flexible. Be comforted by the fact that you can change course and make adjustments throughout the year. For example, if a site supervisor is not quite meeting an expectation, address that with them one-on-one, or you might propose for them maybe a mentor type relationship with another supervisor who's worked through a similar issue. I would provide context, share insight into the reason for the VISTA project and why each person and process is integral to the project's success. Remaining open to receiving context through active listening is helpful, and sharing your questions, your ideas, resources with other intermediary project directors on VISTA Connect is great. This tip rings especially true in my experience. For example, through actively listening to my sites and the site's members, I became aware that a big theme that was unknown to them was identity. So I heard many questions around what identity they're wearing at any given time. Things like who's included as staff for holiday parties? Which logo am I using under my name? What's the title on my business card? And so by remaining open and engaged, I was able to understand those questions a bit better and that they were part of a larger theme that was covering multiple sites. And so I built into my management process some information that would help provide answers in the current point and then moving forward for future vistas and sites. And finally, learning to thrive in ambiguity. So most of us, or at least me, like things that are really easily understandable, real black and white issues. But I found in my projects that things are mostly gray, and it's my job to navigate that ambiguity. Because we work in imperfect systems, we're trying to fix those systems, right? We run into challenges in timing and funding, getting decisions approved by leaders. Instead of letting that sit on your shoulders as a burden, if you can train yourself to move forward on what you can control, it's much better. And it's easier said than done, of course, but it's an incredible skill that you and the VISTA supervisors and the members can take with you really for the rest of your life and career. So to turn challenge into opportunity, have in place some processes to equip others with what they need to be successful. So this looks like creating and providing templates. Several of you said that in the chat for your sites to use, or putting together a short video introduction for new members. If you're helping others, why not equip yourself for success? Recruit other staff to whom you can delegate specific tasks, and keep an eye open for a site leader who may help with building relationships between members and intermediaries. Get and stay involved with what is going on. Not only does that allow you to build and maintain a positive dynamic, but it also to identify some issues and triage the most urgent. I've got one more example that highlights the value of these last two recommendations. I mentioned before hearing a lot of questions about identity. Another set of questions I get are about data collection and sharing. You all had some great suggestions about this in the chat. So for example, the questions I got were like, what data are members collecting? Who are they sharing the data with? Who needs to sign off that they're sharing that data? And who owns the data? I address this, as I do most potential issues, through a lot of communication and trust building. I try to demonstrate my commitment to getting and staying involved by creating intermediary level materials to document clearly what's going on, the concerns that I was hearing, and then I equipped others by offering them some tools for the sites to use and making things really clear through written agreements, such as the Memorandum of Understanding about this data sharing issue. Willie, what about you? I'd love to hear about a common issue you're facing about these topics and how you work through it.
Sure. Thanks, Ryan. Due to the unique requirements of the AmeriCorps program, managing member performance and conduct can be complex and challenging. If an issue arises with a member, supervisors should engage Housing Action Illinois early for guidance on setting clear expectations and utilizing performance improvement and/or corrective action plans. It is useful for intermediaries to establish policies and processes for managing member conduct, as well as templates for creating performance improvement and corrective action plans. Supervisors should promptly notify Housing Action Illinois of an acute or developing challenges related to member performance. This includes performance challenges such as failure, refusal, or inability to perform assigned project duties, involvement in activities that substantially interfere with the performance of assigned project duties, or unsatisfactory performance of assigned project duties. To the extent possible, the supervisor should provide timely and clearly written feedback to the member about any concerns that arise, and set expectations for behavior and performance going forward. If the challenges are of such a nature and degree that the supervisor does not deem it appropriate to provide feedback to a member, they should immediately contact Housing Action Illinois and seek guidance. Supervisors should always promptly document challenges with members for themselves and for AmeriCorps. Documentation should focus on facts like dates of absences, tardiness, missed deadlines, rather than generalizations like lack of communication, poor performance, and include specific actions taken by the host site to correct any problems. For more information about managing conduct, check out the sponsor handbook or reach out to your AmeriCorps regional office.
Thank you both so much for that information. As we quickly review the agenda, we see that we've defined what an intermediary is in the context of a VISTA project. We outlined management best practices for orientation, communication and engagement, and member recruitment, and we discussed ways to find opportunities for success when issues arise. And we're curious as to how well you followed today's conversation, so we'll pop up a poll on your screen and ask you to select the 3 options that represent management strategies intermediaries should follow to effectively support and supervise multiple sites. Again, we're asking you to select 3. So we'll give you a minute to carefully read the question and respond using the poll pop-up on your screen. And again, please make sure you click submit to submit your response. Okay, looks like the responses are slowing down. So for any final responses that are coming in, we'll give you a few more seconds just to make sure if you're about to hit submit and submit your final poll response, we'll give you a few more seconds to do that. Thank you for already responding and following along in today's conversation. So about 5 more seconds, and then we'll continue with the last part of our presentation today. Okay, let's go ahead and close the poll. Thank you again for your participation. Again, the question was, which 3 options represent management strategies that intermediaries should follow to effectively support and supervise multiple sites? The correct answers are A, establish expectations and requirements during orientation, B, maintain ongoing communication and engagement, and D, support sites with member recruitment and engagement. And very briefly, option C is not quite correct because it advises guiding sites and submitting reports to the AmeriCorps regional offices when the site should actually submit information to the intermediary, and then the intermediary submits it to the AmeriCorps regional office. And option E is not quite correct because it actually counters the best practice of meeting with site supervisors in one-on-one settings when possible. Thank you again for your participation. And based on all the information that we've shared with you today, Ryan and Willie, and all the information we saw in the chat, we have some recommendations for further study. Because our discussion today around managing sites is VISTA specific, but there are 2 separate resources. One is from LinkedIn and one is from ZoomShift, and they'll reinforce some management strategies that we outlined, as well as offer new tips and approaches. I will mention that the ZoomShift article does contain self-promotion, and we encourage you to keep that in mind when reading through it. You can find the links to these resources in the chat, and I will also share them after the webinar. And I mentioned earlier, a lot of great comments in the chat, people sharing resources and ideas. I love this collaboration. It's one of the greatest reasons to have these gatherings. And I'm sure you've probably already heard of the VISTA campus already now, but you may not know that there's 2 parts to the VISTA campus. When you log in to learn.americorps.gov, you get to this part, which is called a VISTA training. And this is where you access training materials, recorded webinars. In the top menu, you'll see an options to search the catalog. You can view the calendar, and you can access VISTA Connect. Once you click on VISTA Connect, it brings you to the other side of the VISTA campus, which is this part, where you can collaborate, connect, and communicate with your peers just as you've been doing all during this time in the chat. You can not only continue the conversation, but you can also upload and share resources on the Resource Exchange section of the VISTA Connect. If you're someone who really values the sharing of resources and using each other as a valuable resource, I strongly encourage you to add some time into your schedule this week to explore and engage on VISTA Connect. Before we get to any questions, I want to shift gears and ask what you thought about this webinar. So we encourage you to provide your feedback. You'll see a link posted in the chat to a short evaluation. We do review all of your feedback and truly, truly appreciate your honest and thoughtful comments. So thank you in advance for sharing your feedback on this webinar. And with that, we'll get to one or two questions as we've been looking through the chat. Ryan, one question I saw came in earlier specifically with your name on it, and it mentioned that during the orientation section, you mentioned a lot of things that you mentioned to include in your orientation. Is there anything else that on the top of your mind you can think that's critical or that you would add to that list of things to orient the site supervisors, the VISTA members, the leaders, and community members?
Yeah, great question. I like to mix the orientation with some technical knowledge, right? Some of the things we talked about, AmeriCorps rules, the memorandum of agreement between us and the sites and what we're expecting, talking about the data we're collecting. So real practical, tangible things that the site soups can take with them. And then I tried to mix in that relationship building piece too. So, doing silly icebreakers that everybody secretly hates, but are really important to team building, I think are really helpful. Getting to know those folks. I often provided food when I had a budget to do it. And I know that might seem silly, but boy, does food make people relax and bring the tension down in a room when it exists, whether it was pizza or salad and sandwiches. So often our friends in this work don't get acknowledged for their work and don't get any perks from the work. So if I could provide them with some pizza for lunch, I think they appreciated it and felt that I appreciated for them. So a healthy balance, I would say, in that technical, formal approach in the relationship building piece as well.
Great answer. I love that. Well, thank you for the questions. We'll scan back through to see if there's any, and I'll answer them later. But thank you for all the questions and thoughtful comments and responses in today's webinar. I do want to give you a quick preview as we look ahead, and I will mention that starting in 2024, so next month, we will have a combined leader and sponsor webinar series. And that's especially because so many topics are relevant to the work of both leaders and sponsors. Of course, in each webinar, we will indicate where leader and sponsor roles may differ on that topic. But this new leader sponsor webinar series will actually be on Thursdays, typically the third Thursday of the month at 3 p.m. Eastern. So as a result, our next webinar, which will be again for both VISTA leaders and sponsors, will be on Thursday, January 18th, 2024 at 3 p.m. Eastern on the topic of difficult conversations and direct communication. And so we'll look at some specific techniques on how you can help manage that process. Last but not least, I want to thank you for everything that you do as an AmeriCorps supervisor and sponsor and participating in today's webinar. Especially thank you to our main facilitator, Ryan Fewens-Bliss, our guest speaker, Willie Heineke, as well as our instructional designers, Jess Knight, Vanessa Francis, and Abby Stafford, as well as our producer, Mike. And thank you so much for participating in today. We hope you'll join us again soon. This concludes today's webinar. Have a wonderful day.